Hi you guys, today's lesson is on the distributive property. So before you get started, make sure that you have this worksheet that says multiplying groups or distributive property. The distributive property is a property of multiplication. It enables us to simplify expressions that have an expression being multiplied by a single term. Okay, so I want you to go ahead and look at these examples here. You can see that right here we have an A that's right next to a parenthesis, and inside the parenthesis we have a B added to C. Remember, in math, anytime you have a number right next to a parenthesis, that is implied multiplication. And so when we use the distributive property, we have to multiply both of the terms inside the parenthesis by what's out front. So A times B, that becomes AB, and A times C becomes AC. Okay, so here's an example with some numbers and variables. So we have this 3 right next to this parenthesis, and inside the parenthesis we have an X and we have a plus 3. So when we use the distributive property, we're going to have to multiply both the X and the 3 by the 3 that's out front, okay? So 3 times x gets written as 3x. 3 times 3 is 9. So this expression becomes 3x plus 9. And we can't combine these two terms because one of them's a constant and one of them has an x. They don't have the same last name. So this would be as simplified as our expression can get. Okay, let's look at the next example. On the next example, we have the parenthesis first. Okay, you can see that we have this parenthesis first, and inside the parenthesis we have a B plus C. And then we have the A right next to the parenthesis after the parenthesis. This is still implied multiplication. So the A is going to get multiplied by the B, and the A is going to get multiplied by the C. So this becomes BA plus CA. So let's go ahead and look at the one with numbers. This 5 is the number that's right next to our parenthesis. So we have to multiply both the 2n and the 4 by 5. So 5 times 4 becomes 20. 5 times 2n becomes 10n. Okay, let's look at the next example. We have an A multiplied by, inside the parentheses, we have a B, and this subtraction right here, this minus C, we can rewrite this as adding a negative because we want to remember that in the end, this is going to be a negative AC. So A times B is AB, A times negative C is negative AC. Okay, so let's look at the one with numbers and variables. So this is a subtraction, so I'm just going to change that to adding a negative. 2 times 3B is going to be our 6b. And then 2 times our negative 4c, that is going to give us a negative 8c. And then the last example, we can see that we have our variable on the right-hand side of the parentheses. Inside the parentheses, we have a b subtract c. So we're going to change that to adding a negative. And then b times a is ba, and negative c times a is negative ca. And then the last thing I want you to look at is I want you to look at it with numbers and variables here. The 3 gets multiplied by the 7. This subtraction gets turned to adding a negative, and so that leaves us with 21 plus a negative 6x. Now, let's go ahead and do some examples from the paper that you have in front of you. So on this first one, we have 5 right next to a parenthesis. So the 5 is going to get multiplied by both of these terms inside the parentheses. It's going to get multiplied by the x. It's also going to get multiplied by the positive 1. So 5 times x is 5x. 5 times 1 is a positive 5. Okay. Let's look at number 5. So we did 1. Let's look at number 5. we have a 3 right next to a parenthesis, and inside the parenthesis we have a 2x subtract 3. Let's go ahead and make this adding a negative. So 3 times 2x, that's going to be 6x. 3 times a negative 3 is going to be a negative 9. So this becomes 6x plus a negative 9. Let's look at number 6. Okay, so in this one, let's change the subtraction to adding a negative. And now let's distribute the 5. 5 times x is 5x. 5 times a negative 1 is a negative 5. So this becomes 5x plus negative 5. Okay, let's go ahead and look at some of these with fractions. Number 7. In front of our parentheses, in this case, we have a fraction. We have a 1/3. Because the fraction is right next to the parenthesis, we have to multiply that fraction by both of the terms inside the parenthesis. So it works like this. 1/3 times 3. So we take 1/3 and we multiply by 3. This is going to become 3 over 1. 1 times 3 is 3. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 divided by 3 is just a 1. So 1/3 times 3x becomes a 1x. And then 1/3 times 12, when we multiply that together, the 12 gets put over 1. 1 times 12 is 12. 3 times 1 is 3. 12 divided by 3 is a 4. So this becomes 1x plus 4 after we distribute the 1/3. Let's go ahead and look at number 8. We're going to distribute the 3/4. Remember that on subtraction, we're going to change all subtraction in this class to adding a negative. Now we need to distribute the 3/4 to both of the terms inside the parenthesis. The 3/4 is going to get multiplied by the 5x, and the 3/4 is going to get multiplied by the negative 8. So here we go. 3/4 times by 5, we would put that over 1. That is going to give us 15/4 x. And we'll go ahead and just leave this as a simplified improper fraction. So 15/4 x plus 3/4 times by a negative 8. We're going to put this over 1. 3 times negative 8 is negative 24. And 4 times 1 is 4. And a negative 24 divided by 4 is a negative 6. So this becomes 15/4 x plus a negative 6. Okay, on the next one, number 9, you can see that the fraction that we have in front of our parentheses is negative. And then inside our parentheses, we have a 4x subtract 7. So I'm going to change this to a 4x plus a negative 7. And now we need to distribute this negative 2/5 to both of these terms inside the parentheses. That means we're going to take negative 2/5 and we're going to multiply by 4. So negative 5 times by 4x. This is going to become 4 over 1. Negative 2 times 4 is negative 8. 5 times 1 is 5. So that becomes negative 8/5 x plus, now we have a negative 2/5 times by a negative 7, which we're going to put that over 1. And remember, when we multiply, we just do top times top. So negative 2 times negative 7 is 14. Bottom times bottom, 5 times 1 is 5. And remember, on all of these, we can't simplify any further because we have a term that has a variable with a term that doesn't. And you can't combine terms unless they have the exact same variable or they are both constants. Okay, now let's look at 10, 11, and 12. On these examples, we have decimal numbers in front of our parenthesis. But it doesn't matter if it's an integer or a fraction or a decimal. If we have any number that's right next to a parenthesis, that's implied multiplication. So this 0.25 is going to get multiplied by both the 4x and this is a subtraction, so this one is going to be a negative 8. So we're going to have 0.25 times 4x. I'm going to just go ahead and do that over here. 0.25 times by 4 gives me 1x. 1x. And then 0.25 times a negative 8. So if I take 0.25 and I multiply by 8, I'm going to get 2, and this is a positive 0.25 times a negative 8, so that's going to be a negative 2. Okay, let's look at number 11. 0.6 times by negative 2x and 0.6 times by 5. So 0.6 times by 2 is going to give me a 1.2x, and then a positive times a negative makes this a negative 1.2x. And then a 0.6 times 5 is going to give me a 3.0. Okay, so 1.2x plus 3. And then the last one, number 12, you're going to take the negative 2.4 that's in front of the parentheses, and you are going to multiply it by both the 1.5x and this 1.5x subtract 0.9 becomes 1.5x plus a negative 0.9. So 2.4 times 1.5, let's do that first. Remember, when we multiply decimals, we don't have to line up the decimals. This one just happens to line up in this case. But what we do have to be careful of is if there's two numbers to the right of the decimal in our problem, there has to be two numbers to the right of the decimal in our answer. So a negative 2.4 times 1.5x becomes a negative 3.60x. And then negative 2.4 times 0.9, so 2.4 times 0.9 becomes 2.16 positive, so plus 2.16. Okay, so now that we've gone through all of these examples, let's just quickly go up to 2, 3, and 4 and finish those ones. 2 times 3x is 6x. 2 times 2 is a positive 4. 4 times x is 4x. 4 times 3 is a positive 12. 2 times 3x is 6x. And remember, subtraction gets changed to adding a negative. So this is going to be 6x plus a negative 2. Okay, now you have gone through all of these examples with me, and now it's your turn to practice using the distributive property. So I want you to turn your worksheet over to the other side that says additional practice simplifying. There's one more thing I need to talk to you about. So look at number 6 on this practice sheet. If you look at number 6, on number 6, you'll notice that you have a negative sign in front of the parentheses. And there's no number right next to the parenthesis, but because there is this negative sign right next to the parenthesis, this negative sign actually has to get distributed to both of the terms inside the parenthesis. Basically, what this does is if there is a negative sign in front of your parenthesis, it is going to change both of the terms inside the parenthesis to their opposite sign. So this is really saying the opposite of 6x and the opposite of 18. Okay, so that becomes a negative 6x plus a negative 18. If you want to think about it as being a negative 1, sometimes that's helpful. So if you have a negative right next to a parenthesis, think about it being a negative 1. So then if you were to distribute a negative 1 to both of these, you would get a negative 6x plus a negative 18. So let's also look at number 7. We have a negative right next to a parenthesis. Inside the parenthesis, we have a 6x subtract 18, which becomes 6x plus a negative 18. And then when we distribute this negative to both of these terms, it's going to change both of these terms to their opposite sign. So a 6x becomes a negative 6x, and a negative 18 becomes a positive 18. And again, if you want to think about this as being a -1, sometimes that's helpful. So -1 times 6x is -6x, and -1 times a -18 is a +18. Okay, so at this point, I want you to take this worksheet. I want you to do all of 1 through 10, okay? And then I want you to do all of the odd problems. So you're doing 1 through 10, you're doing all of the odds, and then you are going to come check those off with me. And after you've checked those off with me, then I am going to have you do the even problems. If you've watched the video and you still don't understand how to do this at this point, please come back and ask a question. I super want to help you to be able to do this. And so if you're confused or you don't know what to do or how to move forward, please come ask for help. Otherwise, do your 1 through 10, do your odds, and then I will see you in just a minute.